Hi, I'm Ilona Minkowski, and you are watching ABC News Live. We have a lot of news for you today. A crash in London just outside the British Parliament is now being called a terrorist incident by officials. And extreme flash flooding is causing a lot of problems for residents in Pennsylvania. We're going to get all the details on these stories from our reporters who are on the ground. But first, let's take a look at today's headlines.
The death toll is climbing after a bridge collapse in the Italian city of Genoa. Officials there now say 22 people are dead and 8 are hurt. A section of the bridge, which runs over an industrial area, fell during a violent storm. Witnesses say it happened right after the bridge was hit by lightning. A firefighter from Utah has been killed, battling the huge Mendocino wildfire in California. 4 states hold primaries today. Voters go to the polls in Connecticut, Wisconsin, Vermont, and Minnesota. The entire Supreme Court in West Virginia has now been impeached. One justice resigned last month, and now the other 4 are accused of wasting state money, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on office renovations. One of the justices also faces federal counts of fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. What you want? Several reports now say the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, is seriously ill. Artists like Mariah Carey and Missy Elliott have been offering prayers.
So details are still coming in about exactly what happened in London this morning. So right now we're going to go to our reporter who is there on the ground, Molly Hunter, to give us the latest. Molly, thank you for joining us. And what do we know so far about what happened outside of the British Parliament?
Ilona, good afternoon. That's right. We're actually in Parliament Square right now. It's one of the most heavily fortified, most secure places in London. I'm going to have my cameraman pan right now over to that white screen. This is actually as close as we've been able to get to the site of this morning's crash all day, because the whole area has been so heavily cordoned off. So this morning at 7:37, a driver in a silver Ford Fiesta plowed through, and we'll actually get a little bit closer as soon as the light changes. I'll get you as close as I possibly can. Plowed through a couple of pedestrians, a couple of cyclists, hospitalizing 2 people, and then crashed into a security bollard right back there. At that moment, Ilona, there was dramatic video of SWAT teams basically responding immediately, surrounding the car and arresting him. He was arrested on suspected terrorism charges, but it was an amazing video, an amazing response. The SWAT teams said they were actually just in the area. There's also overhead video that shows the car kind of careening in and then speeding up before that car actually hit the bollard.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about how quickly those emergency response teams were able to get there and to the scene. But what do we know at this point about the suspect?
Okay, Ilona, I'm gonna take you across the street right now just so we can get a tighter look at this. There is a big white screen, and I'm gonna try to get through the pedestrians and through the camera crews a little bit just to see if we can get any closer here. All right, let's just get in there a little bit. So the actual crash happened just behind there. And again, Ilona, you can really get a sense of where we are. This is an extremely popular tourist destination. Even though Parliament is in recess, it is summer in August in London. Extremely popular. Now I'm just going to walk you over here. Come with me. So Ilona, what we do know about that suspect, not much. We know that he's in his late 20s. We know that police do not believe he was on any kind of intelligence radar. And we know he was driving this Fiesta without anyone else in the passenger seat, and there were no weapons found, and that's pretty much all we know right now.
And like you said, there's a lot of tourists there. I was actually just in London the other week, and this is certainly a place where a lot of people go. Wasn't there already additional security based on attacks that had happened or a similar crash that had happened a few years prior?
Absolutely. So, and actually, You can actually see the helicopters. I don't know if you can hear the helicopters up above me. This is absolutely still an active crime scene. But that's exactly right. In the last year, I moved to London about a year and a half ago, 2 days before the first terror attack at Westminster Bridge. But we're extremely close to the attacks at Westminster Bridge, at London Bridge as well. And security after those attacks was huge. London has been incredibly, especially this area, I would say, extremely heavily secured in the last year. Alona, I will say the investigation, hearing from police earlier today, what they did last year in those 2 attacks, they're doing it again. They're appealing to the public, to anyone who has any information, cell phone video, pictures, eyewitnesses. The attack happened at 7:30 in the morning, and as I said, even though Parliament's on recess, there would have been tourists out, there would have been joggers. Of course, we know there were cyclists, there were pedestrians. So today in the police press conference, the Assistant Commissioner really appealed to the public. Anyone who knows anything, please come forward.
And just looking at the people that are standing around you, there are obviously a lot of press, obviously a lot of tourists, but it also seems like they're relatively calm.
I mean, this is actually, like I said, this is as close as we could get to the area. This entire area has been closed all day. But yes, all of these bystanders seem relatively calm. No one seems particularly stressed out. And actually, the police presence around here is so much smaller than it was earlier today. It's hard to describe how much of this area in central London was actually closed off. We were shocked that we could even get this close to speak with you, because they were taking absolutely no chances, looking for accomplices, trying to piece together what the motive was, why this guy was driving so quickly through central London at 7:30 this morning. Alona, I do just want to read one quote from that police press conference. They said, "Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method and this being an iconic site, we're treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counterterrorism Command." This is really important because it appears, like I said before, this guy doesn't appear to be on any intelligence radars. He doesn't appear to be known to authorities. So they appear to be treating it as a terror attack, mostly because of the method used, because of the vehicular attack, not the intel necessarily surrounding this guy.
Yeah, so we still don't really know anything about the motive. Thank you, Molly, for getting right in there for us as close as you can and giving us all the latest from there in London. Let's move on to our next story. In Pennsylvania, heavy rains have led to extreme flooding, and it's been causing a lot of problem for residents. And now they seem to be coming together to deal with the aftermath. We're going to go to Ariel Reshef, who's in Tremont, Pennsylvania. So, Ariel, good morning, and tell us what it's like where you are. I mean, to be honest, thankfully, it looks pretty dry where you're standing.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a reprieve from those heavy rains, Alona, but we are here in Tremont, and this is one of the areas that has just been devastated by the flooding over the last few days and really over the last few weeks. I want to show you here. This is just one of the streets, and you can see that messy sludge, that gooey mud that's still left on the sides here. Just imagine that being inside your home. Well, that's exactly what happened for families on a street just near where we're standing. We went for our World News Tonight location last night. Our live shot last night was inside someone's home where the water line they showed us was about 5 feet. They said that those floodwaters rushed in just a matter of minutes. So you can imagine the terror and the panic. About 15 families had to be emergency evacuated from this area where we are actually standing. They had to roll up their carpets when they came back. They had to try to survey some of the damage, and it was extensive. We're standing in front of the American Legion building right here in the center of town, and we know that this building has now been deemed unsafe. It has been condemned. There is no way we could stand out on this balcony that I'm sure the members like to stand on and convene on, and I'll show you why. Come with me. We're standing in front of this creek, and residents here, the mayor, tell us that this creek that we're standing in front of that looks pretty low right now was actually like a rushing, fierce wall of water that came through like a deluge and swept away the foundation of this American Legion building. So many other buildings like this in the path of destruction, but this one will now be condemned and will have to be torn down. This is one of the places where people here in this town congregate. And we know this is the third time in the last 3 weeks that residents here have had to deal with this kind of immense flooding, really damaging floods. And we talked to the mayor, who tells us this has been a historic summer, a historic flooding event. Alona?
Wow, it's scary and awful to imagine that happening to your home, especially, like you said, if the rain and the flooding is consistent. So what are residents doing now in the aftermath?
Well, we know that those 15 families were emergency evacuated. Several structures have been deemed unsafe. There are not many that have been condemned, thankfully. But again, if we walked around the corner here, which we're unable to do at the moment, we could show you several homes that are just covered in mud. So a lot of the residents that were evacuated spent the night in emergency shelters. They also went to hotels, and by the good graces of people in the community, were able to go into some people's homes and seek shelter. We've actually had this influx, and I'm going to show you here while we're standing here, of emergency crews, workers, construction crews. They're sweeping the streets. You can see dump trucks. This has been the constant stream as we've been standing here preparing for this ABC News Live shot with you guys, and it's kicking dust up into the air. There's still that stench of diesel fuel from the creek and from some of the homes that are leaking gas still here in the area. But back to your question, a lot of the residents here are banding together. The mayor tells us that there are many volunteers from different organizations that have come into town to try to help in this cleanup effort and try to help some of the residents here salvage the belongings that still remain inside their homes.
And that is, one of the things that we often see after a natural disaster of any kind is you do see people banding together, and you really, I think, see the best of people, and that is heartening. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us. All right, now let's get an update on the weather around the country. We're going to Ginger Z.
Alona, thank you. Let's get straight to the flash flood headlines because they have been with us for the last 3-4 days in the Northeast. Pennsylvania, Upper Darby, you see those are actually bed sheets and people attached that are police officers and folks that were just walking by, helping out. That grandmother stuck in her car. They got her out of there, but it was not the only town covered in that murky brown water with the flash flooding that's been moving through. Some places have had nearly 8 inches in just a couple of hours. So watching what happened this morning, Seneca and Schuyler counties in western New York got added to the flash flood emergency list where people were being rescued early Tuesday morning. Now those flash flood watches are in place for much of Pennsylvania and New York because this thing still isn't moving, at least for the next 24 hours. What it'll leave behind is 3+ inches of rain. So it's going to be very local. It'll be scattered, much more so than it was even in the last 24 hours. But you still got a whole nother day of this, and then it'll dry out. Okay, let's move west to the Mendocino fire. Remember, the Mendocino complex is the largest, nearly 350,000 acres burned and now deadly. A firefighter dying there. That makes 11 total in California's season as far as deaths, and most of them from firefighters. Then Glacier National Park, we got new images here. One of my coworkers actually has a daughter who's working there as a guide, and her friend Izzy, who's a guide as well, took this from over the lake, and you can see the fire in the background there, really affecting the evacuations within the park. We wish that we had better conditions, but that is not the case. There are fires burning in Utah, in Nevada, and there are red flag warnings popping up there. You've got a little low pressure that's trying to make its way on shore, and any of that is going to combine with the heat, and you're going to have that tight temperature gradient creating higher wind speeds. And the numbers, they're a little better than they were last week. They will be going down. Look at Seattle dropping to 82, but that comes with the price, Alona, of having higher winds.
Well, thanks, Ginger. And now let's move over to Washington, D.C. and to the White House. The president has been very busy this morning. He's got Twitter fingers tweeting up a storm. And also we now have news coming in that the Trump campaign has filed arbitration against Omarosa Newman-Manigault. And so I want to go to Stephanie Ramos. She is joining us outside of the White House. Stephanie, what do we know about this arbitration claim? What does that actually mean?
Well, Alona, you're absolutely right. We've learned this in just the last few minutes that President Trump's campaign organization has filed charges against Omarosa, saying that she broke the 2016 non-disclosure contract by revealing certain details in her new book and by also revealing private talks that took place in the White House Situation Room. Now, keep in mind, this is the president's first full day back here at the White House after vacationing in Bedminster, New Jersey. He has a very light schedule, but as you said, he has been very busy tweeting this morning, including posting some tweets about Omarosa, and probably one of the most harshest tweets that we've seen yet about Omarosa, calling her a low-life dog. Now, there's the tweet there saying, this is what the president posted, when you give a crazed, crying lowlife a break and give her a job at the White House, I guess it just didn't work out. Good work by General Kelly for quickly firing that dog. Now, just a few moments ago, White House advisor Kellyanne Conway was out here on the North Lawn, and she was asked about that tweet and about that about the president calling Omarosa a dog, and this is what she said. She said, I think it's inappropriate for people to say that they've heard the president use certain words while they were here, never tell any of us that they have a concern about it and then say it later on. So what she's referring to is Omarosa saying and making those claims that the president has used the N-word in the past. So lots of back and forth here today.
It's hard to keep track of what words and, what slurs and what put downs we're talking about when it comes to the president and his language. And that, unfortunately, seems like the new normal here. But with this issue of violating an NDA, a lot of people are saying that, an NDA shouldn't even be valid, really, if you're working in the White House.
All right, and that's probably the same argument that Omarosa will take. Now, we know that there have been, leading up to today, a lot of recordings that Omarosa secretly taped during her time here at the White House. And of course, leading up to today, the launch of her new book. Now, we know that there's that one recording out there where she says she's sitting down with White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, where he's dismissing her. And then another recording where she's speaking with the president and telling him that she's been dismissed. And he says that he didn't know. And then today we have another recording where she claims is a conference call between several Trump campaign aides, where she says the group talks about how they would deal with the potential fallout of the release of that tape where President Trump is heard saying the N-word. So this is going to be a long process, especially now that charges have been filed against Omarosa.
All right, and as I mentioned earlier, I said the president had Twitter fingers this morning because I also counted 8 or 9 tweets regarding the Mueller probe. And do we know anything at this point as to whether or not Mueller's team will actually sit down with the president, but under the president's conditions?
Right. Well, last week we heard from the president's lawyers. They replied to the special counsel's team saying that they wanted to narrow the scope of the questions and they didn't want to touch anything about obstruction of justice. So it's unclear at this point if Mueller's team will make another counter option or if they'll take the extraordinary step of subpoenaing the president to make him sit down and speak with special counsel Robert Mueller. So that's unclear right now. But again, keep in mind, this has been an ongoing back and forth negotiation for the last 8 months. And Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is saying that this should be wrapped up by September 1st, but that's highly unlikely.
All right, and finally, there are some primaries happening today as we keep leading up to the midterm elections. So what should we be watching?
Okay, so we've got primaries in 4 states: Connecticut, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Vermont. And on all of this, really teeing up what we may see in the fall with the midterm elections. Of course, this is, that's why everyone's closely watching these. But the governorships and U.S. Senate seats are all up for grabs in these states. And both parties are, again, watching to see which candidates will be on the ballot in November. And both sides, really, Democrats and Republicans, are on the offense.
All right, well, we're definitely going to keep watching that, and especially tomorrow, because we'll actually have the results then. Stephanie, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And now let's go back to the Manafort trial. The prosecution rested their case yesterday, and now it's the defense's turn. And so we're going to Catherine Falders, who's been covering the story for us out of Alexandria. Catherine, what can you tell us? What do we expect from the defense?
So we're in a little bit of a delay this morning, Alona. We were supposed to start court at 9:30 today, but the attorneys walked in to the court around 9:30, and now they're in a closed hearing. So we're not quite sure what's going on in there. The press nor members of the public have been brought in, and we just saw a few members of the jury walking out of the courtroom. So we're not sure if they'll be allowed in anytime soon. But we expected the defense to bring their case today. We still expect that. And they're most likely going to focus on Rick Gates, Manafort's former deputy who testified against him. They made their case all about him, and we're still waiting to see if they plan to call any witnesses.
So let's not forget the prosecution called over 20 witnesses. It lasted about 2 weeks. Do we have any idea how long the defense might take on their side?
Yeah, so the government cases are generally much longer. The defense much shorter. We're expecting closing arguments they could happen as early as today or tomorrow. The defense's case will be much shorter, and we were only expecting a couple days on there. So we could see all of this wrapping up by the end of the week.
Wow. And any idea if Manafort himself is going to take the stand?
Yeah, so that's the big question. And multiple criminal defense attorneys that I've talked to said that this is highly unlikely. It will be a, quote, Hail Mary, as one legal expert described it to me. So, look, we don't expect him to. However, yesterday I asked his lead attorney this question, if they intended to call him, and he didn't rule it out. He said, we're working on that. So who knows? But we're really not expecting him to take the stand.
All right, thanks for the update there. And let's move to Florida. We have new news coming in a very controversial stand your ground case. And Victor Akendo is in Coral Gables for us. So Victor, what's the latest? What do we know about prosecutors and their decision in this case?
Well, Alona, prosecutors took a close look at this case. They reviewed it. They looked at that surveillance video. And what they've decided to do is charge Michael Draka with manslaughter for the death of Marquis Mclaughlin. Let's take you back to that video. This shooting happened in July. Mclaughlin was inside of a convenience store in Clearwater, Florida. He was with his 5-year-old son. Meanwhile, outside was his girlfriend with their 2 other children. Now, she was parked in a handicapped spot. Michael Draka was apparently upset about that. He approached the car and confronted Mclaughlin's girlfriend. And when Mclaughlin came outside, he saw what was happening. He shoved Draka to the ground. And at that point, Draka pulls out a gun. Mclaughlin starts backing away, and Draka opened fire, shooting and killing Mclaughlin right there. So now the latest here is that Draka has been charged with manslaughter.
A loss of life, over a parking space dispute. What is the community saying about this? How are they reacting? Because obviously Florida has a very controversial history with the stand your ground laws.
Right. They've absolutely had a long history with the stand your ground law. Initially, the sheriff's office decided not to charge Draka, not even to arrest him, citing the stand your ground defense. The community members absolutely were out there protesting. Mclaughlin's family calling for accountability as well. So this arrest and the charge here, the family calls this a small step in the right direction. They call it, somewhat comforting here while they're in a period of profound mourning here.
And do we have any idea what is coming up next for the suspect?
So Draka right now, he spent the night in jail being held on $100,000 bond. His first court appearance scheduled for this afternoon at 1:30. But we should mention that stand your ground cases are very difficult to prosecute.
They're difficult to prosecute. It's something that the sheriff weighed in on too, and that they are subjective. And is there a racial element to this case? I think we have to bring that up when we talk about Florida, stand your ground. Trayvon Martin is something that comes up to people's minds.
Well, in this case as well, because you have the person who died here, Marquis Mclaughlin, is black, and the man who pulled the trigger, Michael Draka, is a white man. And you can actually look at his history. The warrant that we've gotten our hands on now shows that Michael Draka has a history of threatening other drivers. He's done it in that same exact parking lot before, and at least 2 other times he has inappropriately exhibited a firearm. So this man also has a history of this, all things that prosecutors are taking into account here.
Well, Victor, thanks so much for the update on that story. And that is it for our news show, but thanks so much for watching ABC News Live. You can watch us at abcnews.com or download the ABC News app.